right, good evening, everybody. Tonight's topic is 4.16, Disbursing Agents. Can everybody see the screen? And just a reminder, I cannot see the chat, so you all will need to shout out if you can see it.
We see it.
All right. So our enabling objectives for this evening are describe the procedures to advance funds to a disbursing agent using the DoD FMR Volume 5, and state the procedures to return funds to the disbursing officer using the DoD FMR Volume 5. In order to do that, there's a few definitions we need to break down first. So we're going to dive right into that. So that makes up most of our discussion points. So our first one is the Deputy Disbursing Officer. Our next one is other disbursing agents, which breaks down into a few other categories. And then we'll go into the forms that we use, the DD 1081, and that is to advance funds and is also to turn in funds. And so that is us as a disbursing officer advancing funds to the deputy or one of these other agents that we're talking about. And the turn in is one of those agents turning that money back into us. And then we'll roll right into our summary and review. So the Deputy Disbursing Officer. It is an individual appointed by a disbursing officer to act in the name of and for disbursing officer to perform any or all acts relating to receipt, custody, disbursement, and accounting for public funds. And what all that really just means is they're our backup. So if we need to take vacation, leave, we're out of the office, they can do our job for us. They have full capabilities that we have. We are just overall responsible of them. They will be appointed using a DD Form 577. And this is what that form looks like. Can you all see this form?
Not yet, sir.
Negative.
All right, how about now?
Good to go.
We see it, sir.
All right, so this is one of your standard forms for appointing somebody. And so you'll be given one of these, whether it's a GCPC program or if you are the disbursing officer, deputy, certifying officer. It goes for a lot of financial roles. And it's pretty straightforward as you go through most of these blocks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Your block 6 is your position, and it is possible that you will have multiple checks in here. And the only thing that can get a little bit fuzzy on this form is block 7. And so it's your responsibilities to include. And so what I did is I just copied the previous one from my predecessor because they passed their inspection with no issues. But if you are being established, you will want to go out to either FEG or DFAS, and they will give you a list of everything you're able to do. But pretty simple form. It has the appointment on here, and then down at the bottom, you'll use the same form to terminate that position. So that's whether it's the disbursing officer, the deputy, any one of those. All right. Flipping back to the slides. All right, and then this last bullet on here, duties and responsibilities may be restricted by appointing disbursing officer. And that means you, as a disbursing officer, can restrict what the deputy is able to do. And so the double-edged sword with that. So the less capabilities you give them, the more that falls on you, the less chances you have to take leave or jump on other opportunities such as maybe going TAD, going to a school, etc. But then also the less you have to worry about. Deputy Disbursing Officer, as we talked about, they're established by filling out a DD Form 577. And then that form is sent off to DFAS. And they also fill out a signature form, which is that TFS 3023. And then that's just so DFAS has their signature on file and they know that they're authorized to sign and do transactions. It's an FEG hit if you don't have a deputy disbursing officer, but it's not a hit if you don't ever actually use your deputy disbursing officer, which is what I did for about 1.5 years. I didn't have one that I trusted. And then I ended up getting one that was good. So then I had them come into my office and do a lot of functions. And this slide is talking about termination. So again, that's that bottom section of that DD Form 577. And that's how you terminate your deputy or one of your agents. This is going to be, your deputy will be a PS, probably a PS1 or a PSC, and they will have gone to the deputy disbursing officer school. So they'll have an NEC for that prior to being appointed. So what questions do we have about deputy disbursing?
Sir, when you say terminate, is that terminate if orders change or terminate for bad or just causes? Or is it just, when would you terminate?
Yeah, either one of those. So say you have on board the ship or your operation, you have a bunch of PSs and you only have space in your office for 1 or 2 and you want to rotate them through. Well, then you'll terminate somebody and bring somebody else in. So that could just be rotation, or maybe somebody PCS is out of the command, so they're no longer there. You want to make sure you revoke their authority, or it could be because of bad behavior that you can't trust them because of whatever. So any termination of any form. Great question.
Thank you, sir.
What other questions do we have? All right, moving on to disbursing agents. And so I'm gonna jump back to the 2657 real fast. And so, all right, you should be able to see it now. You remember this is a section 5 of the 2657. And so back here we have the disbursing officer, we have our deputy disbursing officer, and then we have our cashiers and other. These are our agents that we're talking about. All right, your disbursing agents typically aren't in the same office as you. As you remember, we broke that out separately on the section 5 of the 2657. So our cashiers, since they were not in the disbursing office, we didn't count their money as part of us. And that's going to be the same with all of these disbursing agents. Almost always. Now, the disbursing agents are typically allowed to do anything that the deputy can, with the exception of signed U.S. Treasury checks. They cannot do that. And they cannot sign statements of accountability, which is your 2657 or your 1219. Our cashier, another agent, they're able to disperse money, collect money, cash checks, that sort of thing. Typically, what you're going to see these in is in your store, though. So they're going to be collecting on behalf of the store or the food service operation. And that's in a scenario where you don't have Navy cash. They cannot prepare vouchers that they're going to be using for themselves, can't sign U.S. Treasury checks, and they cannot accept checks drawn in the name of the disbursing officer, the deputy, or a disbursing agent. Chase, I think you have a hot mic. Thank you. All right. So moving on, well, do we have any questions there about cashier? Or our disbursing agent general term? All right, nothing heard. So we're going to move on to the paying agent. And you all have probably heard of this. Well, you might have heard of this in FUPA, which is a field ordering officer and paying agent. So this is related to that. Absolutely. So it's appointed by the commanding officer upon recommendation of disbursing officer. So it is a higher appointment level because it is a higher risk. Now, this person is authorized to perform specific disbursing cash transactions, and that's really important right there where it says cash. So the paying agent is typically walking around in a FUPA situation with a case of money, and they are doing transactions all in cash. They cannot act as a certifying officer, so they're not allowed to certify their payments. That needs to be done by another party. So they're simply the person carrying the cash and paying it out according to what they're told to do. And that says it's not a collateral duty and they're not in the disbursing office. Now, the paying agent is something you want to be very careful about issuing the authority to do. And according to the volume 5, you shouldn't do it if there are good methods of payment available to you. So if people can take credit cards or checks, or you have sufficient ability to use foreign currency exchange, you should not use a paying agent. This is whenever you're out someplace and you are in an undeveloped area and you need to pay with cash, because that is all that is going to be accepted. What questions do we have there? Pause for us.
No questions here. Nope.
All right. Then we'll go ahead and keep on moving forward. All right, so this is where we get into our enabling objective, which is advancing funds to these agents that we've been talking about. So you're going to advance funds to these agents with either cash or a pre-positioned treasury check made payable to that agent. So with this pre-positioned treasury check, say you're going to go on leave and they're going to be handling day-to-day operations, and it is somebody, so say you know that your retail operation cashier is probably going to need money. Well, you give them a check in advance and they can take it to your deputy who's still there working in the office, and they can get that treasury check cashed so they can have more funds for operations. And this next bullet is pretty important. So each agent is given a limit to how much cash that they're allowed to hold. And you want to make sure that they're not going to go over this. So you don't give them a check that's close to that amount, so they can, you don't want them to have to wait until they're completely out of cash to be able to re-up on their cash supplies that they have. All right, your agents are going to store their funds in a safe or container exclusively assigned to that individual. And they're going to fill out a form, DD form 1081. And I'm going to go ahead and pull this one up for us as well. And all right, so this is our Form 1081. It looks relatively similar to our 2657, a little bit easier to use. But so we're going to have our main lines on here are balance brought forward. So that's from our previous transaction. US dollars that we have on hand. Foreign currency, if you happen to have it. Now, if you're on a ship, you will not have foreign currency, but if you're in a field operation somewhere or you're in a disbursing office in another country, you will. Your collections, deposits, treasury checks, depending on if they have it. Most of the time, they're not going to have a lot of these things. It's usually just going to be the cash and a balance brought forward, and then they'll have total funds in hand. So their ending balance, essentially. Important to note on here, you also have the disbursing officer section to fill out and the agent. So you both have to sign this in order to make it valid. You as the disbursing officer will initiate this advancement of funds. So you will fill out the initial of the 1081. And you're going to create the original and 2 copies. So you're going to keep the original and the copy, and then the second copy will be retained by that agent. All right, we're not going to go through everything that you have to fill out on the 1081. It is pretty self-explanatory. So your line 1 is going to be 0 if you didn't have previous balance. Line 2, US dollars, foreign currency. Line 4 is not used by the Navy. Line 5 and 6 not used on an advance. Line 7 is treasury checks. Line 8 not used on advance. And then any incorrect vouchers returned. So these aren't common at all because we don't typically do transactions like this anymore. So like I said previously, your main line item that you're going to use is going to be cash. Tran, you have a question?
Yes, sir. So on the test, will we be filling out one of these forms, sir?
I need to double check that, but I don't believe so.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
I don't even think you have to use one as a resource, if I'm remembering correctly. Not to say don't pay attention, but all right. So again, this is filled out by the disbursing officer to the agent. The disbursing officer is going to keep the original and a copy, and the agent's going to have a copy. And typically your line that you're going to have filled out is mainly just cash. And they might have checks as well, but mainly cash. Do we have any other questions about making funds for the advance? That was our first enabling objective. All right, nothing heard, so I'm going to move on to the turn in. All right, so the 1081 or any agent's funds really need to be balanced out weekly. So they need to bring you all their funds, so you can check everything that they have to make sure it is correct, and they turn in everything that they have that they don't need. So they don't need to be hanging on to checks because you as a disbursing officer need to deposit those. They don't need to have excess cash. Trying to think of what else. Those are going to be the main things, but you need to check them to make sure that they're doing their job right. The agent also needs to turn in the funds if they're going to be gone for 5 days. So if they're taking leave or they're going TAD, they need to turn in all their funds and all their documentation to you. And then you're going to have to review all their stuff if you believe there's an error that's occurred or irregularity. So if you get suspicious that something's going on, or you've heard that they're not doing things appropriately, or you've had issues in the past with them, you're going to want to check them more frequently. All right, for the turn-in, the agent, for the turn-in, the agent is going to initiate the 1081. And again, the disbursing officer is going to keep the original and one of the copies, and the agent will keep a copy. So the main difference is when the disbursing officer is issuing the funds, they're going to fill out the 1081. And when the agent is turning in funds, they're going to fill out the 1081. Again, the lines are pretty self-explanatory: U.S. currency, foreign currency, collections. So that's if they receive checks, cash, well, checks, any deposits them. Again, these are not going to be common line items. It's mainly going to be cash. Vouchers paid. So that's if it's like a deputy disbursing officer. They'll have some paid vouchers, collections, deposits. And then line 12 is their sum up of that form. All right, whenever they're turning it in, you, the disbursing officer, and the agent will sign the 1081. So that's both for issuing and turn in. And what questions do we have about this overall process? I know we ran through it pretty quick, but a little limited on time. All right. Since y'all don't have any questions, I have some questions for you. All right. Who initiates DD form 1081 on a fund advance? All right, you all can throw it in the chat if you want. So the question is, who initiates DD form 1081 on an advance? Yeah, that's right. The disbursing officer initiates it on the advance. So who initiates DD form 1081 on the turn-in? Absolutely. The agent at whatever, if that's a cashier, if that's a pay agent, if it is deputy disbursing officer, they are the one who will fill that out. All right, how often should the disbursing officer balance his or her deputy, agent, or cashier? Yeah, so
no less frequently than monthly.
yeah, so it does say that in the slide, but also on that same slide, it says at least weekly. So going through there, you should do it weekly. For most of those, the deputy, you can do monthly, but I would highly encourage you to do weekly. All right, next question. Who appoints an individual to the position of a deputy disbursing officer?
The DO using the DD 577.
That is correct. The deputy or the disbursing officer using DD form 577. And this question isn't on here, but who signs off on the pay agent? Yeah, it's a CO. So with that, your deputy dispersing officer has all the same rights as you. They can write checks, they can do all the same transactions, but the pay agent requires a higher level of scrutiny than the deputy, even though they have all those accesses, just because of the sheer liability of carrying around a bunch of cash. All right, so the last of this is just a summary page covering the enabling objectives, which is describe the procedure to advance funds, which we did, and describe the procedure to return funds. And so that wraps up our lesson for the evening. What questions do you all have before we wrap up? No problem for the session. All right, so that concludes the evening. I'm going to hang out here for the remaining 3 minutes and 58 seconds that it's going to let me hang out. So if you have any questions or any issues, like maybe you're Zach and you have a really ridiculous fit rep issue that I don't understand, and you just want to ask the question about it so we can kick it around. No problem, guys. Thanks for showing up, and I will try and get this recording posted tomorrow onto YouTube for anybody that wasn't here. Hopefully that's a little bit more accessible than DoD Learn, especially since it keeps on deleting my recordings.
Hey, sir, hypothetically, since my fit reps are due by the end of this month, it's less like 2 weeks left, like how much trouble do we get in if it's like submitted after the deadline of the end of May?
So you definitely want to try and get it in there before. I've had some submitted after, and it wasn't a big deal. But the problem is if you don't get it in there by the deadline, people start to forget that it's a deadline, and they will just kick it around, especially if there's a confusing issue like your summary group does not match your reporting senior, which is very confusing. Yeah, so then I've seen it to where if it doesn't get answered, that I had a sailor once and he had an issue. It wasn't your issue, but they're kind of disagreeing who should do his fit rep, and ended up I checked into the command like 8 months later and nobody had done his fit rep or his eval. And so I had to jump through a bunch of hoops because it was one of my people, so I wanted to take care of him, but nobody else cared.
Sure.
And it was a nightmare.
Yes, sir.
MK, I will make a note to check to see if you are enrolled in the course. And then I think Dan and Jesse, I owe you that too. No, Jessica, sorry. All right, what else do you all have? I have less than a minute left.
Nothing here, sir. Have a good night.
You too.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I'll send an email with some screenshots of of my fit rep.
Yeah, hopefully we can figure that out. Hopefully Mitch has seen that before. And if not, I can take it to our admin shop and I mean, it's a very small admin shop, but maybe they've seen it.
Sounds good. Thank you, sir.
No problem.